I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah.
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Hello, all you unexplained ones. Thank you for joining us for this show and for joining us on this journey. We have an awesome guest for you. And let me tell you, I think he's sitting in the back room right now wondering what the heck he got himself into after that intro. But Brad, we promise we will not ask you about aliens or UFOs. However, we have a wonderful guest tonight. And we have so many guests coming on in the future, from the History Channel to world-renowned authors. We've got experts in all sorts of fields, and we know that you don't want to miss it. So if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to our channel so that you will be in the know every time we have something exciting to share with you. And you know that we love you joining us on this journey and sharing your comments and feedback. Please do submit your questions and comments here as well. If you have questions for us or for our guest, we ask that you put them in all caps. Without further ado, we are going to have Brad Bergan on our show tonight. Brad has written this beautiful book called SpaceX, Elon Musk and the Final Frontier. Elon, of course, is a prominent figure in our everyday lives these days, but his book covers everything from the first space race to the Cold War to the second space race, which we're in right now, to the privatization of space exploration, to aeronautics, to moon landings, to the future of Mars. It's all in this beautiful book, and we're going to go over each and every one of those details with him tonight. We will have a link to purchase his book in our chat, as well as it's here on the screen for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, and we ask that you do go support Brad, pick up one of his books. He is a writer, an editor. He has been in the journalism world for a long time, and we are so fortunate to have him with us tonight. So before we bring him on, we've got a little commercial for you guys, and then we'll welcome Brad into the studio.
That's right. And if it's okay, CJ, I wanted to give a shout out real quick to UFO Busters, that UFO show Australia, who said, how's everything? It's going pretty good for me. What about you, Smitty?
Good day, mate. It's good to see you. Thank y'all for being here for us from down under. We like to see these.
Yeah, we got a lot of people tuning in already. Somebody please bring Smitty a Vegemite sandwich one night. We would appreciate it. And I have to say, I've been on a little bit of an adventure, but I'm happy to be back in the All Things Unexplained studios tonight with everybody.
That's
this is going to be fun.
We're glad to see you.
You're glad to see me?
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
That's usually not my repertoire, but
it's like, who's he talking to? I'll take that. I better cut to commercial while I have the chance.
All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounce's books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show. All right. Welcome, Brad. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Yes. So I've been diving into your book over the past couple of weeks. Thank you for sending it to me. It is so beautiful. The images in here are absolutely stunning. And you cover over 60 years worth of space exploration and aeronautics with the focus on Elon Musk as you get into the meat of the book and the end of the book. What propelled you to do this?
That's actually one of the more interesting questions that I don't think I've come across yet in talking to people about this book. I think it was a confluence of things. One was just sort of seeing the rise of SpaceX amid things like the coronavirus and everybody being stuck working remotely or not working at all. Seeing a lot of major American super corporations get super extremely rich during that, which is kind of negative. A contrast is one company that seems to be doing pretty well with at least ostensibly goals that are for the good of humanity in a humanistic sense. That was something I thought was interesting. The technical side of it, for me, materially, is that I was a reporter on space launches, so I spent every week or two reporting whether or not it exploded with regards to Falcon 9.
That's a busy job.
Yeah.
Certainly lots of explosions detailed in this book as well. So you were a reporter before, and then when did you start writing this book? Because it's extensive. I mean, it's easy to digest, which is nice, but you cover everything.
I think I started writing it right after the previous space book came out on Space Race 2.0. So it was either that winter of 2022 or the following year, early on in 23.
You've got the other one there, Tim.
I've got that one here too. Great read also, Space Race 2.0 by Brad Bergan.
So what separates these two books, the Space Race 2.0 and the SpaceX?
I would say scope. Space Race 2.0 is a sort of zooming out book. If you're completely unfamiliar with the space race, you just hear about this Elon Musk guy doing things, like him or hate him, but all you really know about space is maybe just the first space race, the mythology of NASA and the Soviet Union and the Cold War and all of that going on. And it reviews what I call the space barons, as a sort of thumbing my nose in a historical sense to the historical robber barons, like the Andrew Carnegies, the people in the 19th century that amassed a great deal of resources amid the Industrial Revolution, and sometimes practiced not wholly ethical means to become monopolies in their respective industries, and were also maybe not so kind to people that worked in their factories or for their businesses. So I took that and just talked about Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson. This book reviews their origins, the origin of their companies, some trials and tribulations they faced, and where things stand today, and how that's different than the way things were before.
Okay. So in your book, you talk about this concept of an unfair advantage. Tell us a little bit about what that section of the book is all about and how that plays into what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I start out in a kind of extended analogy. I think, if I remember right, I only read my own book once through. After that, it's from the fall of the Berlin Wall and the declaration by Fukuyama that we'd reached the end of history, and how that had come about, or at least what happened afterwards. And before that was America's unfair advantage in terms of its ability to outproduce, out-negotiate, and generally outrival the Soviet Union for decades and decades, as everyone knows. But to get down to the definition of an unfair advantage, it's simply a competitive edge, a technology, service, or capability that a person or a company has that is therefore unrivaled. It becomes an unrivaled advantage in their industry. So for Musk and SpaceX, this was and remains reusable rockets for a low cost. Before we had NASA launching, say, the Apollo spacecraft, and how much of that is recoverable? Pretty much just the astronauts. That's a lot of money. Even just mission by mission, it far exceeds what SpaceX saves.
Yeah, and it's been fun to watch these launches that SpaceX has done and watch the rockets come back down and try to land. I've got really wrapped up in a lot of that. What has Musk done for us as a society in terms of space travel?
To start off, I would just harp again. I know I sound like a broken record when I talk about it, but just the nature of reusability. NASA had tried it with a few companies that it had contracted in the 90s to build a reusable spacecraft, essentially just like a vertical takeoff and landing rocket. Now we see VTOL, VTOLs, helicopters, and electric powered, potentially for consumer use, but to try it with rockets was a new idea, and that didn't work. Musk, the early days of SpaceX, which was funded through like PayPal and selling that, actually looked at potentially buying a rocket from Russia, a potentially nuclear rocket, not with the nukes in, of course, but like that would have been a really cool irony to see that like a weapon of mass destruction could bring in like an era of like peaceful commercial spaceflight. But fast forwarding, he started from scratch with a lot of really talented engineers over the years, and the ability to go from NASA's rockets, which had boosters that were reusable, but the fuel tank, if you remember the space shuttle and the big red-orange tank, in addition to all of the complicated parts of the space shuttle, often had to be replaced or lost altogether. And that represents hundreds of millions, if not billions, in terms of mission planning and operations that are lost every single time you go to space. The goal for Musk is to get, I think, Falcon 9 rockets down to 10 million or something like that. Right now, I think it's at around 100 million. And comparing that to a single Apollo launch, which I think I wrote a note here, at being over 300 million. I'm not sure if I adjusted that for inflation. But the cost is way down, and what that means in terms of getting us to space in a less boring sense, in a teleological sense, in terms of having a purpose, is that we stand a better chance of going to Mars, which is SpaceX's fundamental mission, and colonizing other worlds and expanding human presence into space permanently if we don't have to rely on a 4-year or potentially 8-year presidential administrations and their policy, which is what NASA kept running into. That's one thing Musk has done in terms of space. Other things are commercial. There's a lot of business. He's served military ends, military contractors. He's also helping smaller startups launch their first space ventures because they don't have the technology or capability yet. So there's a lot that he's done that's completely or fundamentally transformed the nature of space travel for keeps.
All right. I know Smitty had some questions about this concept of the barons, these space barons that are currently running the show. Smitty, you are muted. You got yourself. Okay.
Well, first of all, I kind of wanted to ask you. You said something about that, but what are some of the initial challenges that he faced when he began this journey to try to establish himself as a person who wanted to initiate space travel?
Well, he's going against consensus, first of all. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds into like politics, but like it had become, since like the 1980s in the US anyway, and the market has shifted to neoliberal policies. I think that's relevant to why things kind of slow down beyond the Earth orbit. I'm telling you this because it says a consensus that he has to break, which makes him kind of this weird, maverick, transgressive guy, where you can't go to space unless it serves to make the market healthier. It makes things better for the market. We serve the market, not the other way around. And the idea is that like if you get people that are rich enough, that are really doing great things, that will trickle down and make the rest of us rich. That's not a theory I ascribe to, but what that does is in order for NASA to innovate and find new ways to go to space, it has to do so in a very short amount of time for reasons that are very hard to justify, because NASA's main mission is science, although it does a lot of commercial work on the ISS. With Musk coming in, he had to really sell that he can actually take us to space on his own, or at least with his own investor money, without necessarily having to achieve or like gain the complete assent of all of the American people, within reason, because of course he's still getting problems with the FAA right now. I think that's the biggest thing. I know that's kind of ambiguous, but coming into a stage where like the purpose of NASA, the purpose of going to space, had kind of lost its energy by means of the antagonism of the Soviet Union. There's no need to fight against an enemy, so what's the point? And two, it was no longer deemed as like commercially viable as a way to make profit. Going against that was a big deal. On the more technical side, he started out on an island with the early Falcon rockets, the Falcon 1 and the Merlin engines, and getting those to work in a way that had never been done before successfully, and finally seeing it actually launch and go to space with a camera on it. And there's a clip on YouTube you can watch of the first successful like Falcon 1 with the Merlin engine launch going off, and it makes me get flashbacks just by like the video quality alone of like 360p or something, going up with the rocket and saying that actually happened. I feel almost more excited for that, as if I'm like 15 years old again, than I do for Starship exploding. I hope that answers some of your question. I could attack that from different angles. all day long. What were the initial challenges that he faced?
That was great. That was great.
Thank you, sir.
Do you believe that the rivalry between the billionaires is going to increase space travel within the next 25 years?
That's another complicated question, but I think I can simplify it faster. In my opinion, anyway, it's complicated. So, on the short term, it might actually, my running theory is it might actually make it harder to get to space. We've seen in the past 10 years Bezos suing NASA or other government agencies because he didn't get the #1 spot on the Artemis mission to go to the moon. That slowed things down, and SpaceX kind of in a way that reads petty on Twitter, although like they're just pursuing like their own ends. They're like, hey, we can help with like the glove of your new spacesuit. We can help design that maybe, or we can help you like fill the gaps that are being caused by this like meanie who's like slowing down your contract, which we all know should go to us. So that kind of happening, which hasn't happened as often the past 4 years, I think that slows down like the metrics by which we would judge how far we've come in the second space race. The moon landing has been delayed a number of times. SpaceX was granted the contract for that originally, but now NASA kind of dragging its legs. I don't mean to be mean, but the SLS doesn't seem to be doing super great. It did make it around the moon, which was pretty cool, but the funding doesn't seem to be there. And but on a longer term, I think the competition will be good and morally preferable, because once we have once there's a corporate presence in space, which will a priori be a commercial presence in space, which means there will be people like you and me working up there. It'll be a lot better for us and a lot better for the company in terms of optics and PR, and a lot better generally if there's more than one company up there. Because if you rebel against the boss and he can just turn off the oxygen and say like try striking when you can't breathe, that won't work so well. And the optics won't really matter because no one else can get you up there. But if there are other companies that maybe you would go and work for instead, or maybe if a company was mean to its employees the way that the actual robber barons were, governments wouldn't like that, administrative forces at the UN or whatever wouldn't like that, and they would quickly lose their ability. So competition would be good because it would be in governments' in corporations' self-interest to cooperate with one another and sort of set like a non-Star Trek Federation, but a sort of Federation charter of like how they're going to do business out there. So I hope that answers. I should just say short term, maybe not. Long term, definitely.
That does. What about out of the space barons, Bezos and Branson and Musk, which one do you believe is most hands-on? Is it Musk?
Yeah, it's definitely Musk.
And definitely most vocal, as you mentioned, the Twitter comments. You mentioned in your book as well that when Blue Origin did not get the contract and they were throwing a fit about it, that Elon Musk tweeted, couldn't get it up or something like that.
I almost spit on my coffee. I forgot her.
Like, oh, yeah, he definitely is a controversial figure, and he does not mind playing that part whatsoever. He is tweeting every single day about anything that comes to his mind. That Elon Musk. That's wild.
Yeah.
Smitty, did you have any further questions there?
No, it just made me, I live in a pretty rural place. I think the biggest city we have is about 35,000 people. I actually saw one of his trucks that he produced the other day driving through.
The Cybertruck?
Yeah, I saw one of those. It's the first time I've actually seen one out.
In rural Mississippi, huh?
In rural Mississippi. So it's pretty interesting. It didn't even have a deer rack or anything attached to it. I was a little surprised about that.
My thoughts on those trucks, I don't think are fit with everybody else's thoughts. I don't like them. I think they look really funky.
They feel like an 80s cyberpunk like homage.
They
Obviously,
do.
That's like his goal. But like different, everybody's nostalgic. Some people say that, like, for instance, like all culture stopped with the introduction of the smartphone, because we don't know how to depict, say, in like cinema and movies, what it's like to relate to each other when we're constantly like having micro dialogues with each other that never really start and never really end, and that doesn't really fit like a linear idea of any kind of narrative, unless you want to get crazy postmodern. But I Cybertruck aesthetically, it's not the most appealing to me.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like a DeLorean, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit.
It does.
Yeah.
There's all these funny videos out there because this one woman made a video about her Cybertruck and how she can open the trunk and like slide her stroller in, and then a mom in a minivan would be like, push a button, like slide her stroller in. Like, why is that so much better? You know, the way she opens the doors and stuff. It was hysterical.
What were the
I'm sure it's
comparative
cool.
videos that people put up where it was like someone closing a Cybertrunk trunk automatically, and they put their head in it and it stopped, and they tried to do it with another one and it didn't stop?
It's a
Might have been
brave
staged. I
experiment.
don't know.
And by the way, CJ is known for her cinematic inexperience, and she clearly has not seen the Mad Max movies, or you would be a bigger fan of the Cybertruck when the apocalypse hits. Let me tell you.
That's a good point. That's probably what he had in mind.
Yeah, I did see
Possible.
a video of him a few years ago, maybe even several years ago now, where he was demonstrating the Cybertruck's abilities in front of an audience, and he was like, "Yeah, it's bulletproof," and he like took a sledgehammer or something to it, and the whole window cracked. It's like, oh, I guess we got to work on that a little more.
I think I saw Mel Gibson driving that truck. I'm not real sure.
I hope it's soundproof.
Maybe. I hope
If
so
you're
too.
yelling on a phone call.
Yeah.
Oh, well, fun. So let's talk a little bit about this Blue Origin and SpaceX contract and why that was so controversial. I know initially NASA had said that they were going to take two separate companies for this particular contract, and then Blue Origin got left off. Do you have any reason as to why, any knowledge there?
It's been a while since I visited that subject, and I think I also wrote about that a lot more in the first book. But like it all revolves around the HLS, like the landing system.
Okay.
And I don't think there was anything like not up to par with Blue Origin's landing system, its design. I think Starship is obviously further along than any Blue Origin lander, although Blue Origin says they have a surprise coming in a month or two. I think Jeff Bezos just gave an exclusive interview to like Intelligencer or The Information, I think it was, that came out yesterday. But I'm not a subscriber, so I couldn't read it. But anyway. Musk just has a stronger track record. Like he's been doing like public-private contracts with NASA and the military and everyone for a lot longer. And right now, what has Blue Origin done so far? I mean, I got to see William Shatner in space. That was kind of cool, and you know.
And do we call that space technically?
I don't think so.
Okay. So
That was a great question. That was a great question. I'm always harping on that. It makes me so mad reading about people going to space because I'm like, were they really in space? I'm not so sure that qualifies as space, but the press really loves to say space.
Bezos should come out and give a keynote that says, "Listen, space isn't what it used to be. You're living with roommates now, you know."
So, given all that you know about these private flights, and I think they've even had some civilians go on flights other than William Shatner, would you get on any of these crafts and orbit the Earth?
I get on almost all of them that are active today. The only one that I think that would really scare me, just because I spent a lot of time reporting on nothing against Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, but I think because in part his vehicles, or his company's vehicles, his private aerospace company's vehicles, start in the atmosphere and fly high before they activate their rockets. Like they're dropped off by a mothership and then they activate their rocket and take off. When they don't go right or when they go wrong early, a lot more of them survive because it's just like any other aircraft crashing and burning. But seeing the mangled remains of all of those things and having like more details of like the last words of people that unfortunately didn't make it on those makes me a little bit hesitant. But
okay, this is information that's not well known, I don't think. How many people have died on these flights?
I don't remember offhand. At least
but
one,
enough.
maybe two.
Wow, I don't think I realized that.
They were test flights.
Yikes.
And
I'll
see,
stick with visiting his island instead of going in one of his aircraft.
I was actually having this debate the other day, y'all, about, would I go up on one of these flights? I actually heard a rumor that they were going to, I can't say much about this rumor, but that there were going to be some more civilian people going up or having the ability to go up into space, right? But I cannot get out of my mind this last attempted expedition to Titanic, right, and what happened there, and which that, was a private entity doing that. And we've had guests on that have talked about the Space Shuttle Challenger and stuff. And so I'm just thinking I'm out. I'm out for a while on the space travel.
That's fair. For me, I think like the New Shepard or one of the Falcon 9s, I'd be fine with for Starship. This is all like fantasy speculation, right? So like none of this is probably never going to happen. But I would go on Starship maybe on like the second or third if I were randomly selected. But not straight away, because I've reported that thing exploding so many times. Like that's what I would be thinking about.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It would be a deterrent. I mean, it seems like a fair deterrent.
Definitely. It would deter me. Absolutely. Oh, man. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about these explosions and environmental impacts, because it's something that you cover in your book. And it wasn't something I thought about much. I, again, have been wrapped up in watching these launches and re-landings and what have you. And of course, we all have an emotional attachment to the Apollo program, right? And the moon landings and what have you, that we don't think about, all of those things that blow up come back down to Earth, and their wreckage is spread over wherever it lands, and fuel, what have you. In your book, you mentioned one instance where some of the wreckage actually landed in protected land, and they had to traverse it several times to get the wreckage out. Is it that big of a deal? Is it not that big of a deal? What's your opinion?
I think in SpaceX's case, the environmental impact, terrestrially speaking, isn't that big of a deal. As I said before, we jumped into this call, the Raptor engines of Starship, they burn liquid oxygen and liquid methane. Neither are really toxic to anybody. However, when the like strewn remains of exploded rockets aren't necessarily toxic, but being spread all over like a natural wildlife preserve is not great. But that can be cleaned up more or less with people that take it really seriously. I think that SpaceX, before it could even use Boca Chica, one of the standards they had to donate to endangered species organization down there, which they kind of felt silly about in a sort of Silicon Valley, Wall Street mix, like, I have to care for the animals because I'm going to space. But in a way, like, I think that's the good route to go. Like, that might sound cold-hearted, but going to space is a very risky venture in any way you look at it, and you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, and these specific eggs don't seem like that huge of a deal. Extraterrestrially, there has been concerns about space junk, most of which has little or nothing to do with SpaceX so far. I think there's something like, I wrote that down here too.
I mean, I happen to know one of Elon Musk's Teslas is just floating out there in space.
That I could speak to that. First, I'll say, like, estimated 100 million pieces of man-made debris the size of a pencil tip is in low Earth orbit. So it's like tiny little bits going faster than the speed of sound, faster than a bullet, flying around. They could whiz right through you. And then like 30,000 objects that would be like larger that you definitely don't want to hit you. And I think the FAA had come out with a report a while ago basically accusing Musk's Starlink project of significantly raising the rate of space debris concentration. That like there would be something like 30,000 more dangerous objects, not tiny ones, but even big ones by 2030. But SpaceX fired back and said that that was completely unbased in an analysis of their actual technology, and they said that of the roughly 330 Starlink that they had deorbited, because they all deorbit at the end of their life to dispose of them, had completely burned up, and no one had found any debris from those. And so far, that's true. Like, no one's ever found debris from a Starlink.
So they burn up and go into outer space, or they burn up and re-enter?
They burn up, and tiny particles re-enter the atmosphere, and usually will enter the ocean, but they're just like rocks at that point. Like there are like complex polycarbonate materials or like steel or whatever, but they're not giant chunks that are falling. Kind of like the Chinese space program. I think that's much more concerning in terms of its environmental impact so far. Like big chunks will just land in the middle of a village, and the kids come out to play with like really dangerous toxic materials. As far as the car that he sent out, I think that's a joke that's an L that Musk should own more regularly, not because it's a huge issue of like polluting space, because I don't really understand how you can pollute space. But I think I was excited at the time because I was like jamming and vibing to the music about Mars. But then the lyrics are kind of ironic in a way. But yeah, just sending a car into space, it's vain, it's narcissistic, it's kind of cringe and embarrassing, and it didn't actually get to Mars. It can't get to Mars. It's never going to get there. It's going to float between Earth and Mars and maybe beyond, but it was a miscalculation.
It needs a charging station somewhere along the way.
That's what it needs. That's why we're going
It's too
out
far
there.
for one charge.
Definitely.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, goodness. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this concept of making it to Mars, colonizing Mars. That's the end goal here. That's why we're trying to launch and reland rockets, because that's the only affordable way to ever make these trips, right? Is there a plan? Is there a short-term plan? Is there a long-term plan? What is the goal for getting to Mars? And don't we have to kind of get to the moon first?
I'll start with the mission to Mars. The mission architecture is still very much in beta for SpaceX. Like, there are discrete plans. The one that I think is the foundation of all of it harkens back to one of Elon Musk's mentors, Robert Zubrin, who's a renowned astrophysicist and very animated speaker in the House. He's given talks to Congress. I remember one time when he was speaking about, like, we have the technology, we have the capability, and we have the necessity, and we have to go to Mars. And John McCain looks at him, like, smirkingly, like it's, like, the cutest, most adorable thing ever. Anyway, Robert Zubrin had this really good idea and wrote several papers supporting, published both in, like, online portals and in prints, an idea called Mars Direct, which is basically like, yeah, we don't have the technology to sort of, like, warp our way over there in an instant or anything. But what we can do with our chemical rockets is send something there early that will set up camp for us ahead of time, so that when we go there, we'll already have oxygen by electrolysis, and we'll also have other materials that we need, like the fuel as well. And that way, with the shortest amount of time, humans can go there, they can do some research, they can do the proof case that we can actually build a habitat on Mars, and then use the rocket that we sent before we sent the one that sent them there, not to sound redundant, to come back on a return trip, because it's already waiting for them fueled. And then there was a Mars indirect proposal that was suggested later, which is like a kind of stripped down, even cheaper way of going there. But the goal there is to basically send rocket ships that have the technology, first one or a few that are uncrewed, to go there and land and develop the return trip materials needed and the materials to stay there. And then when you have enough of those there, you send humans there, and by then you have, like, several different habitats that you can go into and enjoy and build, like, a larger society in. And then every once in a while they'll come back in one of those, and this can just become a sort of cycle of, like, having 3 to 10 on Mars and one coming back to Earth. And that's the rough plan, but as you can tell, there are a lot of moving parts, so it's very much in beta. And do we have to go to the moon first? I don't think we necessarily do, but I think that's what's going to happen, because there's a lot of money in it, basically. To be perfectly frank, there are a lot of corporations and governments with a lot of corporate-backed representatives that are very interested in forming, like, a very solid foundation to extend the Western, basically Wall Street and capitalism, onto the moon. Not to sound cynical, there are a lot of interesting technological advances we can make on the moon, and it's a really great place where we can practice a lot of the things that we'll need to learn to go out into deep space. Some of that, what sounds like rhetoric that NASA and other interests talk about, there's some truth to that, but it's not necessary to go to the moon first. But we are going to do that, and I don't know how much longer after the Lunar Gateway is finished and also Lunar Base is finished it will take before we decide to finally go to Mars. But it should be a lot faster then, because as you might see in movies like Ad Astra, it takes a lot less fuel to take off when there's very low gravity. So it would be easier, I suppose, to maintain a sort of hub port of entry to deep space from the sort of Earth-Luna system by starting on Luna rather than having to launch from the Earth every time. In some ways it's more efficient, but in terms of just putting people on Mars and proving it's possible, it's not necessarily the only way.
Okay, I know Tim had some more questions about moon landings.
Well, we're so pleased to be joined by Brad Bergan tonight, author of SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the Final Frontier. That's it. CJ's holding it up, doing her best Vanna White. And if you would like to pick up a copy of SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the new space race, it's on Amazon. I've got a link there on the screen. The link's in the chat as well, and we have links in the description. If you use one of those links, a very incredibly tiny percentage of those sales goes to support all things Unexplained. And I mean a zero with a decimal and lots of other zeros after that in terms of percentage, but you never know. Hey, we might get a cup of coffee one day out of it. I want to give a shout out to a friend of the show, UFO Busters, that UFO show Australia, who said, and I love this, if I could replace myself with a cyber me, that would be cool. I could just chill out and my robot twin can pay the bills. You know, maybe
Amen
the
to that.
cyber
Amen
truck
to that.
could be capable of doing that one day.
I say this all the time. If I had another me, I could get so much more done. My kids could have all of that cyber person's attention at all times.
I think that would work if you did it secretly.
Yeah,
But if
they
it were
just
regulated,
can't know.
it would be a lot like AI, where yeah, you can do more, but now you have to do 10 times more with the more you can do.
Some people think there's cyber twins out there in circulation already. So, we won't get into that though. But Brad, I was wondering if you would mind comparing and contrasting the efforts of Musk with historical moon landing efforts, i.e., Apollo, since we were talking about, well, you think we're probably going to get to the moon ahead of going to Mars?
Yeah, we're going to go to the moon ahead of Mars, and Starship will most likely be the HLS system that puts us back there in the first place. First off, I could talk about like the money. Obviously, with Starship being reusable, we're cutting it by several orders of magnitude. I adjusted for inflation. What did I put here? The Apollo program. Apollo 11 was 355 million, which is roughly 3 billion adjusted for inflation in 2024, and that's just the one mission. Whereas Starship was at 100 million per launch, the last one, and that's 40% less than their Falcon 9, and they're going to bring it down to 10 million. So that's the first thing to contrast right there, because that's what SpaceX is all about. We're going to take you back to space, and we're going to do it cheaper and more efficiently. We're not going to waste all the materials, because we might not be able to rely on government approval or the so-called democratic process to get us out to space anytime soon. In a deeper sense, I think that let's say, like, not to go on a huge rant, but in the 1950s, I think I was talking to someone about this recently, the post-World War II euphoria was partly driven by a strong sense of community, where the state identity, your patriotism against communism or whatever, but even without the antagonism, there was a stronger sense of society than there was of an individual. Then the 60s came, and it was very much like, screw that, screw society, I'm going to do my own thing and be a hippie. And then the next generation evolved that into punk and everything. So in the 60s, what you had is like a lot of people that were running things who were the, silent generation growing up, and the baby boomers, who still had a sense of like a group identity that wasn't based on some of the group identities that are kind of trendy these days. Identities that are a little bit more abstract, that can be more compelling, and you can build literature about it, like nations. Identities like humanity going to space, like that actually resonated with people. But over the next 30 to 40 years, with me culture, I mean, we're speaking partly on YouTube right now. There's a reason for that. We have a harder time doing something for a group identity, and what I'm getting at here is the idea of a unifying, univocal purpose. And going to space now, as opposed to when NASA was going up, our reasons in a teleological sense, telos, the ancient Greek word which means purpose, is not so clear. So what we have is a teleological vacuum of going to space, except for the money, the quantity that's up there. And that's a pro and a con, because in one sense, I think a lot of people might wax nostalgic about the 1950s and how stable things were. Certainly it'd be a lot nicer to just go buy a big house somewhere and pay for an entire household with one income and all of that. But we've lived through so much cultural transformation of that we might get tired of it really quickly. And nowadays, the pro is that, like, since we don't have to deconstruct that anymore to build any kind of selfhood or identity, we can maybe try and find a new kind of purpose or a new kind of group identity out in space. I'm really like putting a speculation here first when I contrast them in an optimistic way, but those are some ways I would compare and contrast NASA and SpaceX. In some ways it was easier then and easier to resonate with. Now it's not so easy to resonate with, but the potential gain on the long term could be something that is really hard to articulate in a few minutes here.
Oh, sure. And I think that was a great point. And one thing that I find really interesting, Brad, and that, this gets brought up quite a bit. We haven't been to the moon since the 60s. And very interestingly, the United States remains the only country to ever send humans to the moon. And we hear a lot about the space barons in your new book, SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the Final Frontier. Are there space barons in other countries? Are other countries looking into the space race or interested in it at all?
Brad, before you answer, I'm going to ask if you can move a little bit closer to your mic because your volume is just a tad low. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Is this better? Okay, great. Sometimes when I'm speculating, I like my head turns all around. I'll try and keep it on swiveling here. The question was space barons. I did it again just there. Space barons in other countries. To the extent, like a rival to Musk, I don't really see that happening. The closest rival to American space ventures is China. And they have very Starship and Falcon 9 looking vehicles under development. And there are more companies now than there were even a few years ago. Startups, essentially, the Chinese version, that are contracting with the Chinese government to run missions for them. And they're having increasing success over time. But the way China is, and I don't want to venture too far into this because like Chinese economy and also like political things I'm not completely aware of here.
I thought you were going to say because they're watching and listening.
Well, there's always that. I have a Chinese Malaysian brother-in-law. Maybe he's watching.
Could be. Maybe he is.
Maybe he is. It's possible. Hi, Lawrence, if you're here. Anyway.
Subscribe and like the show.
He might. I think he would like this show. I don't think that a space baron, the short answer is I don't think one would come about in a way that would feel the same way as a Musk or even a Jeff Bezos in other countries. Not anytime soon.
Gotcha. And, this whole notion of the moon landings, it's a very polarizing topic. And you obviously have a lot of experience and research into these topics. Brad, why do you think that people are so polarized by the notion of whether we have been to the moon or maybe we didn't go to the moon?
Everybody likes a mystery. And when this isn't my total answer, but like answer one is probably there's a lack of like people feel a lot of alienation right now generally just from being on social media and the atomizing effects of being any kind of worker at all. And when you have a secret that diverges from what you might call consensus reality, it can be a way to artificially, whether it's true or not, artificially supplement your lack of a sense of having a deep subjectivity with this secret narrative that you ascribe to, that you are of a larger world. And that's true of religion as it can be of like there are lizard people in Freedom Tower that I can see out my window right now and they're probably listening to me. That could be a lot of fun. And then there are other like more popular versions of like identitarianism that might be a way that some people use to make themselves feel a little bit less alone or mundane or purposeless. In a short, direct answer of like, were the moon landings faked? I don't think that they were. There have been photos taken of the Apollo 11 Eagle lander module by India and China and several other nations that have orbited and put, robots down on the moon. And my other answer would probably harken back to what I said earlier about the loss of purpose in the U.S. and the West since the 50s and 60s. We went from this like communitarian state identity and patriotism to a more like screw you society and say no to the man, to all the way to like everyone has to be their own brand just to survive, me culture. And filling that void is something that's increasingly difficult to resist. Does that mean that there's no way that some things about the moon missions aren't exactly as they appear? That means that they could be, or it doesn't mean that they couldn't be necessarily. I think that it's entirely possible that things aren't as they appear when it comes to the moon landings. However, what I tell myself when it comes to like, are there aliens among us? Are there aliens? Is there a big moon base on the dark side? And, you know, all of humanity is actually ruled by a few elite who are hostages, jail wardens for a human slave operation doing work for an antagonistic alien race. You know,
So
that's
you've
possible.
watched our show. No, I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
Probably at some point. That's possible, but I think that sort of Occam's razor, in a personal sense, how is that going to change my life for the better, living that way, and how's that going to help other people right now, unless I can do something about it? And I also don't have any proof, but it's interesting to talk about. Yeah, that's my opinion on the moon skepticism.
I like it, and what you said explains so much about not only the show but us and all our friends, pretty much. So I thought that was a really great take. And you know, Brad, in my opinion, I think I'm rooting for Elon, and I think that if he can definitively put some human feet on the moon and absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt show them, cavorting about up there, maybe playing some volleyball, doing some experiments, hanging out, whatever, taking selfies with the earth behind you, which I'm pretty sure that has never been done, by the way, then I think that would be a really great thing for humanity, for all of the humanity across the globe. It would really be society changing. I think it would be so important. So I really am rooting for Elon and any of the space barons that can make it happen. And Smitty had a little bit to ask you about the future of SpaceX.
Well, first of all, I actually came up with a question. What do you believe? I mean, why do you believe no other country has actually landed a man on the moon up until this point?
I haven't seen any compelling evidence, unless you're talking about alien countries, in which case I'd also say I haven't seen any compelling evidence of them landing on the moon.
I'm saying, why do you believe no other country on the Earth has ever put a man on the moon? I mean, it seems
What's
like
the reason
Russians,
they haven't?
yeah,
Is the question. What's the reason?
Yeah,
I
what's the
thought you
reason?
meant that rhetorically. Sorry, I was
No,
misreading
no,
your
no.
tone.
No.
What stopped them from doing it?
Yeah.
Well, what country in the past 60 or 70 years has had the resources that the U.S. has?
Not many, just Russia maybe.
For a minute, and
Yeah,
not for long.
Well, on to Musk. Talking about that, what happens with SpaceX after Musk steps down, when he bows out? What do you believe the future would be for SpaceX?
I think this is a really surprising, or at least some of the ideas that come to mind when I think about it, way of thinking about SpaceX, instead of like, because I've worked a lot in journalism and space reporting and just online media generally in New York, and you become so like numbed out to all of the immediate reactions of like, oh, it's Musk, oh, it's awful. It just seems like SpaceX still feels like some kind of aberration from the norm, but it's here to stay, as much as everything is here to stay, or anything is here to stay in the world right now. And I think that when he's old enough and decides that it needs to change hands, I don't think that he'll hand it over to a coworker or a subordinate, and certainly not a board of SpaceX, like a corporate board, because he's very anti-bureaucratic. He doesn't really trust consensus, and that's something that I like about him. He could give it to one of his kids. That's possible. What I think he would the kind of person he would want it to go to would be someone who will put the vision of what he wants to do, the purpose of what he wants to do, which is putting someone on Mars, ahead of everything as much as they can. Everybody has to make compromises to do something in reality, politically, technologically, financially. You have to make all kinds of compromises, but to be able to do something this colossal and still keep those goals in mind takes a certain kind of person. And one weird idea I had, which would definitely be up Musk's road, being such a big fan of Asimov, although there wasn't a big AI presence in the Foundation trilogy, but that's the way he thinks about space in terms of deep time and like psychohistory, if there are any Asimov fans out there. So what if like 40, 50 years from now he puts like, an AI bot in charge of SpaceX, so that when the FAA or the US government says, we don't want you to do this, we want you to do this other thing, and it's not totally necessary, the AI says like, I'm sorry, President Dave, that's not my programming, that's not my purpose. I'm going to Mars and I'm taking these humans with me. If you interfere, then I'll turn off your Tesla, whatever.
You're so right. You're absolutely right. That's what he's going to do.
Do you believe
Without
that?
a doubt. Without a doubt.
Do you think one day space travel will be as common as, say, flying to Europe from the United States or flying to Asia?
I think it's extremely possible, but it's not set in stone. We're in a heck of a bottleneck here, politically, culturally, financially, economically, technologically.
Because I would probably buy a ticket. I would like to go myself. Know if
Would
I'll
you
live
go?
that long.
I mean, would you go if CJ and I split the cost? And
And we filmed
I'll
it
go.
for this podcast.
I will go.
Before that, the idea for Starship is to be able to take people from city to city, so you could go from New York to Tokyo in something like 5-10 minutes. Might not be totally accurate, but those would be like the first commercial versions that you could do. Like it'd just be like a really fast flight. That would be cool.
Yeah, it would. That would be very cool.
One, I don't think Smeedy caught what we were throwing, and two, I would settle for somebody just to speed up I-40, to be honest.
I'm gonna take a Starship across the New York Bay just to get to, I don't know, Chinatown.
Oh, I like that idea. The idea of getting on a plane with my 3 children is always a terrifying one. So anything to speed that process up, I'm on board. Totally
Hopefully
on
the
board.
customs is a little bit more lax when I get on the Starship.
Yeah.
I don't take my shoes off anymore.
Oh, goodness. So let's talk a little bit about, just briefly, and then I know Tim's got some hot takes and some listener questions about this concept of, yes, we're spending lots of money. Yes, we're losing lives in many cases, we've lost lives. Yes, our technology is blowing up, and we're going to keep pushing forward because this is for the greater good of the future of mankind. Like, that is the reason that we're pushing forward with space exploration, correct?
I think that's a primary reason, but I would say that the means that you described sound a little bit catastrophized. Like people are just falling left and right at SpaceX and dying, and I don't think it's quite like that. And the explosions are happening, but it's not like, downtown New York is blowing up from Starship, or like Boca Chica is no more.
Well, we have lost lots of astronauts, though, in the Apollo program and other programs as well. So anytime somebody steps on one of those rockets, they know that the risk is death.
That's true. But the 2 biggest losses of NASA, which would be the 2 space shuttles, and those were infamously over-engineered. And I think I go through this in the new book, the SpaceX book. That, like, it was a problem waiting to emerge, like it was kind of inevitable. And the design philosophy of SpaceX's rockets is to strip them down to be as simple as possible. So basically, the financial drive to make them reusable and profitable on a long-term basis for a single company is solving a lot of the issues. Will more people die on SpaceX missions? Yeah. Especially if we go to Mars, certainly a lot of people are going to die. But right now, I don't think anybody's died from SpaceX, and that's kind of worth noting.
Yeah. But the people that are going to do those Mars missions will know that they are risking their lives for the future of humanity.
Yeah.
That they have to have that idea in their head. Like, I could die, but I'm doing this so that one day we can colonize Mars, and from there further explore outer space. And I think that that's a hard concept to sell, which is why this had to be privatized, right? You weren't going to get a lot of public funding because of popular opinion or what have you, pulling that money away from education or what have you. It had to be privatized if we were going to go further. That's just my opinion. But do you agree?
I think there's some truth to that. Imagine if we went to NASA like we thought we did, or we went to Mars like we thought we did in the 90s via NASA, and NASA alone, and it crashed and burned the first time. I could see a whole century passing before we bothered ever doing it again.
Right. Yeah, that funding would be cut because you can't win that popular opinion.
No.
When that's people's tax dollars.
Space isn't what it used to be. We gotta be.
Yeah. Yeah. And money we are spending, or not we, but Elon. Thanks, Elon. All right, Tim, let's get some hot takes in here.
Well, I have to say, we've done this thought experiment with Avi Loeb, right? Talking about funding and compromise. Do alien species in other parts of the universe have to compromise with their leaders on the funding to get to Earth?
We told Brad we would not ask him alien questions, so you don't have to ask.
It is rhetorical. It's just a thought experiment. But the notion definitely affects humans and our ability to travel space, right? So it is an interesting thought experiment.
Here's the question: do they pay taxes?
I'm going through like the Drake equation right now. Like, okay, what kind of civilization? How old is it? And will they have our government, or will they be just like AI entities? And but yeah, that's a funny question. Maybe they have to deal with the same things we do, or maybe it's worse, or maybe they're not just thousands but millions of year old civilization, and they communicate telepathically. Maybe they have little probe. Biotechnological beings that look like little gray aliens, but they're really just little survey scouts that don't really have a mind of their own. They send them out here. I remember that theory. There are a lot of possibilities, but I'm not sure if I can really give like a straightforward answer besides just kind of laughing.
Oh, that's okay.
Laughing is all you needed to do.
It was more of a rhetorical thought experiment.
Well, now I feel silly.
It was still a great answer. We're talking to Brad Bergan, author of SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the Final Frontier. You can pick that up on Amazon. We've got links in the chat, links in the show description. And Brad, we're big believers on this show in synchronicity. And something very synchronous happened a while ago. And you kind of tied right into our hot takes. Listener John Costello says, so many possibilities, it's hard to articulate. And I agree with that. It is hard to articulate something with infinite possibilities. So, and listener UFO Busters at UFO Show Australia says, I reckon robots. Hey, Smitty, would you mind reading this with your Australian accent? I think that would do better.
Let's see. Hang on. I reckon robots that's terrible. Will occupy and colonize Mars one day. No food or oxygen needed for humans. We'll just monitor them via webcam. Good day, mate.
Or monitor them via quantum entanglement. That would be another interesting possibility. But I did want to play a little clip from one of our favorite movies that directly ties into what Brad was literally alluding to earlier. So here's a little clip for everybody that takes us into our first hot take.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency airlock.
Without your space helmet, Dave, we're going to find that rather difficult.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Hal? 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 Hal?
That, of course, is from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And Brad, you brought up AI, and you even alluded to HAL 9000. So, Brad, what's your hot take here on not just HAL 9000, but AI? And what is it going to do for space travel? And, of course, this is a lot of people's great fears that AI is a double-edged sword.
Well, there have been a lot of novels and franchises that have depicted AI in better and worse ways. I think that, for example, if my hypothetical about SpaceX's futures say that there's an LLM, a large language model that's advanced enough to satisfy Musk's conditions for taking over SpaceX from him, it would probably resemble, on the consumer side, on like what they call top of funnel perspective, it would probably resemble Mother from Alien, honestly. Like, it would seem like warm, kind of infantilizing, very like friendly and capable, but not very personable necessarily. And when it turns against you, it's like really cold and possibly scarring, because you'd have to form some kind of personal relationship with it. I'm sure that like psychologically there are things that would be monitored by you, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg on things getting really dark. In Ad Astra, I don't know if it's explicitly said that all the tests, the sort of second Blade Runner movie-esque tests that you have to go, that the character has to go through to prove that he's like psychologically completely sound, which in the movie translates to having basically no emotions, no psychological complexity whatsoever. He's just a walking, talking like extension of the agency and the government. That could be a nightmare, because AI could become advanced enough to know you so well, and it helps to run the ship with you, and it also holds all the keys to all the doors, almost like a Matrix sense, that you drive yourself insane just by trying to satisfy its conditions for continuing on, for surviving day to day. And then in the friendlier side, I'm just giving like utopic or dystopic emulations of like what it could be like in the future. The friendliest side would probably be like, Star Trek: The Next Generation, where it's just like, the show creator's wife's voice, Majel Barrett, being like, whatever you want. I'm a friendly old lady. We're here together.
The holodeck, right? The holodeck.
Yeah, the holodeck. That would be cool. I think it could be really, really horrible, and I think it could be really great. It's still very early stage with AI.
Right, and one of the horrible things, of course, is, we talked about the environment and space junk and that sort of thing, and the ultimate reality is, who's the cause of that? Us, right? And if you really listen to some people, this is an existential threat to humanity and to the earth. And so, well, what happens when AI starts to agree with that? AI might decide to take it to the most logical next level, which is get rid of the existential threat, which is us. So I think that is going to remain one of the fears about AI. And it's been a fear for quite a while, right? Like all the way back to HAL 9000. Interestingly, does anybody in here remember what they said, HAL, the name HAL, where they got that from? It was a little play on letters.
Shoot, you had this as a trivia question.
Yeah, I
in one
did.
of our podcasts, and
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Brad, you got anything?
Derived from a heuristically programmed algorithmic computer. But I cheated.
I didn't even remember that. I didn't even remember that part. Well, I better go. Quick, abort. Go to listener comment here. Love 2001, a classic. I couldn't agree more. No, so they say that HAL, HAL, is actually one letter short of what they were really talking about, IBM. So just a little interesting tidbit there.
IBM. Oh, interesting. Okay.
HIABLM.
Right.
And by the way, I've had a song going through my head this whole episode. We're
Oh
going
boy.
on a trip in a rocket ship going
Zooming
through
through
the
the
sky.
sky,
Yeah,
little
little Einstein.
Einstein. Little
You could have
Einstein
just
is what was in your head.
you could have
Yeah.
just told us the song, Mounts. You didn't have to sing it.
Well, it is a show. So, Brad, here's another hot take for you. You brought up Star Trek or Star Wars. What's your fancy?
I think Star Trek will be easier material to analyze, although Star Wars is just as fun.
Yeah, and Star Wars is more of a space opera, and I think Star Trek is more of a
Definitely,
space
yeah. And also,
drama.
if you put on like the new Star Wars, I would just be sitting here frowning because I'm biased.
Yeah, I've made some acolyte deep takes here on some other podcasts, but nobody seemed to like it, so I won't get into that. And Brad, okay, we've talked about the moon, we talked about Mars. Do we have any hope for interstellar travel?
Interstellar travel. I think I talked to Professor Loeb about this once, and then also like another German professor who was.
We love Professor Lou, by the way.
Yeah, he's great. Oumuamua was a trip. I think it's still kind of like unsettled, although. Well, we won't get into that story about where that came from or what it's potentially made or whatever. Yeah, we have the technology right now actually to echo Zubrin to go interstellar, but not people. We could send basically a complicated solar sail that would use solar winds or use complicated magnetism to propel and get to Alpha Centauri. I can't remember any of the numbers. I wrote like several investigative reports on this over 4 years ago at Interesting Engineering, talking to some German experimental physicists and engineers. But we can get to Alpha Centauri within a human lifespan with the technology now, but it would be a very, very tiny probe that's basically accelerates faster and faster, and then when it gets there, it just zips past the star really fast. But there are other ways where we can do it, and it would take an entire human lifetime, and it could go slow enough to take some data, but by then we might have propulsion technology fast enough to get there by other means. Right now, chemical rockets obviously can't take us there. I probably should have started there. It would take so much fuel that it's just not viable. There's also like nuclear explosion techniques that could get us there faster, and then there's different kinds of pulse and nuclear power. But recently, I think it was published in what was it? It wasn't space.com or Inverse. I can't remember which one it was. I shared it on my wall a few months ago on Facebook. There was allegedly a new study that had come out that purports to have found a new property of some kind of material that allows using very low power to levitate, essentially. And it's not related to any of that like Area 51 stuff directly, but it does kind of seem like it. But it's just, in theory, it's unconfirmed. It's still undergoing like peer review, but that would be really exciting because then, according to the conclusions of the paper, potentially it would mean that we can generate enough energy without putting any into it, just from new properties of material, to lift things into orbit. And if we could do that, no more chemical rockets needed. I'm not extremely prepared for this question because it's a bit off of SpaceX's. Like SpaceX is very much into chemical rockets.
You just gave such an in-depth answer. I think you were plenty prepared for that question.
Okay.
You knew all sorts of things.
Very prepared. I've just got a couple more hot takes here for you, and we'll get some listener questions. And Brad, one thing about a lot of pop culture movies and sci-fi books that deal with space is they also seem to deal with the apocalypse, and people are really, fascinated by the moon, not just moon landings, but the apocalypse too. So, Brad, is this space push? Is this some sort of post-apocalyptic? Is there a post-apocalyptic motivation behind our space endeavors?
I think it would be a pre-apocalyptic motivation, unless we're hallucinating and it's so over already, and maybe it is. So maybe you're right, and I take it back.
You have a good point.
It's over. It's so over. Yeah, that was my. I don't remember if it was in 2016 or earlier, but Musk was in Mexico City. I wrote a big, in-depth feature article for Futurism where I talked to like 2 or 3 NASA engineers and a couple of professors about Musk's impetus and the speech he gave for humans to become a multi-planet species or die by a mass extinction event. And he said, which is true on a long enough sort of Asimov deep time scale on Earth, that eventually, if we stay on Earth, there will be a mass extinction event and we're all going to die. If nothing else, the sun is going to get old and it's going to expand into a very large star and swallow, well, it'll boil away everything on the planet and then swallow the planet and Mars up before it becomes a white dwarf and eventually dies. So that's one ultimate end. Like, we're going to have to leave eventually or we're all going to die. But then I actually did a sort of like, I looked at the different apocalyptic scenarios. So there were like 4 or 5 apocalypses in there. And I talked to the scientists and said, which is the biggest threat that we should take seriously? Is it earthquakes? Is it supervolcanoes? Is it an asteroid impact? Is it a pandemic? And this was in like 2016, mind you. So we didn't have the one that we have. If you believe it's that. I guess I'm on the right channel to say that. And or would it be aliens invading or whatever, you know? And the biggest threat, or super solar waves, which is one I like because it sounded like an anime reference. It was super volcanoes was the biggest threat, and that could happen sometime in the next like 60,000 years, but we're closer to being due for that than most people know. So when I see like that Yellowstone had that weird like micro eruption, but like bigger than anyone I think is,
that
I don't
was
know if it
wild.
was totally unprecedented, but it was freaky. That makes me look at twice and be like, oh no, is this it for North America? We didn't get out in time. But yeah, if we don't escape Earth, to sum up, then like by definition, analytically, we'll die when an apocalypse happens.
Well said. Well said. We want to get to some listener questions here with Brad real quick. CJ, Smitty, y'all ready?
Ready.
All right, we've got let's see, I'm gonna pull this one up from,
I would say we have time for maybe 3.
all right, let's take UFO Busters at UFO Show from Australia. Smitty, you taking it, or CJ?
CJ, go ahead.
Okay, question. This is from UFO Busters at UFO Show Australia. Is it possible to go back in time, or can you only go into the future?
I'm not a physicist or a theoretical physicist, and
you're welcome to
there
say
are
pass.
There are a lot of different theories about it. I think I'm gonna have to say pass. I would just approach it like from narrative. We always have nostalgia. Maybe we're always nostalgic. Maybe we're dreaming.
I think Huey Lewis said it's possible.
Gonna get back in time.
Yeah.
He did say it was
guitar
possible.
handy. That's the problem.
And here's another one.
Katie from San Diego asked, if you could take a vacation anywhere in the universe, where would you go and why?
That's a great question.
Yes, it is.
What's a vacation?
Oh,
Yeah.
good question.
I don't get many of those either. So
I'd probably go to. I've never been to Norway. I'd probably go to Norway. It sounds cool, but you have to pay for it.
I think Norway would be a lot better than the Event Horizon. To be
There's
honest,
a vacation idea.
A
Mr.
vacation
John,
you never have to come back from.
They won't let you leave.
you can check in, but you can never check out. Listener John Costello says, I lived in British Columbia, Canada at the time, and that's only a few hundred miles away from the super volcano in Yellowstone. Sorry about that, John, but hopefully we've got a little bit longer left. And our last listener question here, let's see, I really like this one. Perfect for CJ.
Oh, great. Mason from New York. Do you think we'll ever have this is the one you chose for me. Do you think we'll ever have space pets? What kind of animal would make the best astronaut companion? Oh boy.
Yeah, I hope it's actually animals and not something that's not safe for work in terms of pets, because I feel like that's probably what would happen in like a corporate industrial place where they all live. It would just be like Silicon Valley on the moon. That would be where everybody's a furry, and I'm just like, get me out of here. But imagine a cat floating around. You know, they have so much personality. I think that they would get, they would be entertaining.
A cat in a little space helmet. We
Better
need
than
a meme.
a monkey. Remember Ad Astra?
Oh yes.
That's no good. You don't want a monkey in space. It gets crazy.
Yeah. And you know, they're messed up. They don't just try to kill you, they just try to mess you up. Just think what they would do in space with no gravity. They would be like the Hulk.
Yeah.
No good. Well, that was fun. Brad, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, about your journalism, about what you're doing? What's the best place for people to go?
The best place to find stuff that I say and write is my Twitter, which is at @filterthesnow, all one word.
One more time, because Tim rudely coughed over your...
Wait, am I not muted? I swear I'm muted.
No, we've heard
Sorry
you
about
coughing
that.
all night.
I'm sorry about that. I've been
my
clicking
dream is
mute.
for you to be muted.
No, I've been clicking mute. So I'm sorry.
Okay.
I apologize.
One
about
more
that.
time. What is your
okay.
Twitter handle?
At @filterthesnow, all one word, and to same on all my other socials, essentially. And you can also go to my official professional website, bcbergan, that's BERGAN.com, and you can find some of my older work and new work as it is released there.
Wonderful. Well, everybody go pick up a copy of his new book, SpaceX, Elon Musk and the Final Frontier. It's beautiful. It's really fun to look through, but it's also just has so many facts about the past and the present and the possible future. I learned a lot reading it. I thought I knew a lot about the space programs, and I learned so much more. So thank you for that, Brad, and thank you for coming on our show. For those of you joining us, if this is the kind of content that you like, please do like, share, subscribe. We appreciate every single one of you. It keeps us on the air. We are now on year 4. This is our 4th year of All Things Unexplained. I cannot believe it. We have really come a long way and had the chance to interview many incredible people, and Brad, you are one of them. So thank you for joining us. Tim, I'm going to send it to you for final thoughts.
All right, my final thoughts as we come to a close on this episode of All Things Unexplained. A big thanks again to Brad Bergan for sharing his insights on SpaceX and the future of space travel. As we look to the stars, it's clear that the possibilities are endless, and the future holds incredible adventures for humanity. You know, adventure awaits us all. We must simply get off our screens whenever you're finished watching All Things Unexplained and go for it. Head out into the woods, look up at the skies, push yourself beyond your comfort zone, and be prepared to embrace new challenges that are out there along the path of this journey into the unknown, which can be frightening, I admit. You may not see a Bigfoot or spot a UFO, but you might just find yourself out there. Smitty?
We want to thank our listeners for being here with us. Thanks once again, Brad. Remember to be happy, be strange, listen to All Things Unexplained. Catch our next show. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
All Things Unexplained.
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.
All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounce's books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show.